Okay, hello there. The rest of the video isn't this bad audio quality, so don't be disturbed by that. But this is the third part in a three-part series, so if you haven't seen the other ones, go watch them. Hope you had a Merry Christmas, and please enjoy this. We begin with the Crusades against Araby. The Crusades against Araby, 1448 to 1451 IC. In the year 470, the war-torn southern realm of Astalia was invaded by Sultan Jafar and the armies of Araby. Diplomatic envoys pleaded with Britannia to send aid, and the king sent out a call to war towards all of Britannia. Throughout all of the dukedoms, this call to war was heard, and the countless knights pledged their lance to the king's holy cause. In his noble wisdom, King Louis the Righteous gave permission for warriors of the empire to cross Britannia on their journey to Astalia, for they too had pledged their aid, despite the lack of unification for the empire during the age of 3 emperors. This military campaign had since been named the Great Crusade, in homage of the zeal of these warrior knights. Within time, the armies of Jafar were pushed back by the more mobile and heavily armoured forces of the crusading knights, forcing him to relinquish his hold on most of Astalia. Retreating back to Araby, but leaving a token force of troops around the important city of Maghrita, Jafar's armies were hounded by the Bretonians, who pursued them tirelessly. The crusading generals eventually elected to follow him back to his sandy realm, and enlisted the aid of Astalian ports and Tilaean warships for an amphibious assault into Araby, their sights on the major city and trade port of Kofur. As the Crusaders made ready for war, Jafar was also preparing, fortifying the major seaports with his men. When the Crusaders finally arrived in the spice-trading city of Kofur, it was heavily fortified, and the defenders were well prepared for the coming battle. Yet they weren't prepared for the wrath of the northern kingdoms that Jafar had brought upon them. And once the defenders first started faltering against the onslaught of knights and siege towers, a breach was made, and soon the high spires of Kofur were pulled to the ground, and much of the population were put to the sword. Not even the harsh desert conditions could perturb the knights, and their fervour very slowly took their toll on Jafar's warriors, as many desert tribes under Jafar's control were getting tired of this war of attrition. Despite Jafar having a far vastly larger army than the Crusaders, Jafar's armies began to disband, for many of the tribes of Araby grew weary of the despot's incompetence. After frustrating months of minor skirmishes, the Bretonians faced Jafar in the Battle of El Haik. Elemental spirits of the deep deserts were summoned to fight alongside Jafar's armies. With their numerical superiority, they overwhelmed and outnumbered Crusaders on all sides. But when all hope seemed lost, the army was almost at breaking point, but a host of both Empire and Bretonian knights charged furiously at the tightly packed army, mowing down the lightly armoured soldiers until finally the armies were scattered by the sudden death of Jafar, disliking the harsh, dry lands, for it proved too vast and hostile to be completely conquered. The Bretonians sailed back home, with cargo ships laden with exotic goods and treasures, whilst the Empire knights remained to hunt down the remnants of Jafar's army for another century, which would eventually lead to the creation of several more knightly orders. Meanwhile, a second great crusading force, led by Baron Tybalt, left Bretonia and was travelling the long road over land towards Araby. Hearing of the great victory, this force did not press on to the desert kingdoms, feeling saddened at the loss of such a glorious campaign. Nevertheless, under Tybalt's leadership they pushed on to lands that had not been conquered by any civilized race. Seeking glory and honour, they fought with the armies of the greenskins that plagued these lands, and many a great victory were won. The hardy dwarfs that dwelled within the mountains around these lands rejoiced, for the Bretonians had dealt a serious blow to their ancient enemy, and they bestowed such praise and honour upon the knights. Rare was it for these days for the reclusive dwarfs to make any contact with the other nations of men, other than the Empire. These victories eventually bestowed a bond between Bretonia and the dwarfs of Karaz and Kor. These lands later became known by most as the Border Princes. Indeed, some knights remained, building great castles in the following decades and hoping to create their own kingdom upon the frontiers of this new land. Despite these grand crusades beyond Bretonia, the dukedoms themselves were not left undefended, for there were still imminent threats within the borders of their kingdom that needed to be secured. Of pox and rats, 1786 to 1812. One such threat coincided with the deadly red pox that swept through southern Bretonia decimating the populations of peasants living in stinking slums and hovels villages. As if it were a trigger, foul rat-men creatures erupted from their tunnels and attacked the Bretonnian duchies. Using the same method used against the Empire, the Skaven unleashed the red pox upon the sewer networks of the city of Bordelot. The scourge was once more successful, and nearly 1/3 of the populace was infected and killed. But a Baron Discard acted quickly and ordered the poor quarter of the city to be sent to the torch, killing both the innocent people and the vast majority of the infected populace. This act, for its deplorable lack of humanity, halted the contagion to further spread. However, just a quarter of a century later, the full assault was launched by the Skaven, and nearly all of Bretonnia and northern Telea blossomed with a virulent outbreak of the red pox. As the nightmare that unfolded within the Empire once more repeated itself, the whole of the countryside was lost, with cities of Brionne and Quesnel soon fighting for their lives against the venomous hordes of the Skaven Empire. It seemed that this time the Under-Empire should triumph, but fate was an ill will towards the Rat-Men, and once more their glorious victory was taken away from them. Duke Merivec of Mousillon and his black-armoured knights rode south where they slew thousands of the chaotic creatures and lifted the siege of Brionne. The route his army took mirrored the road taken by the Grail companions before him, and as he pushed towards the east, crossing Carcassonne, his dreams were filled with blood, death and horror. In his delusions and hubris, he actually believed that he was Landuain reborn, and he was the only one who could save Bretonnia from destruction. Meeting up with the armies of Paravon and the Fey folk of Athaloran, a great victory was won, and the rat creatures scattered before the martial might of Merivec and his most trusted knights. In the middle of the battle, Merivec was soaked in blood, reveling in the killing. Even after his foe lay unmoving, he still continued to hack at them with his gore-soaked blade. The virtuous and honourable knights of Paravon looked on in horror. After winning their great victory against the hordes of the Under-Empire, the once mighty dukedom of Mousillon had since began its mutual decline, as the Duel of Bretonnia, after a heretical event, took place and shook the very foundation of the kingdom to its core. In the wake of his victory, Merivec invited the dukes to his castle for a great victory feast. Many saw him as a saviour, for he had saved Brionne and Quesnel. Nevertheless, the banquet horrified the chivalrous dukes. Dinner was served by shambling servants, and the dukes were shocked to see spitted and impaled criminals arrayed throughout the hall. Merivec did not understand their discomfort at all, and having already drained many goblets of Bordelot wine, he drunkenly claimed that his hospitality was being dishonoured. The king was repulsed by Merivec, and spoke out against him and his court. In a rage, Merivec accused the king of jealousy and plotting against Mousillon. The king formally challenged Merivec, though the other dukes begged to be the one to be allowed to punish the disgraceful knight. In the ensuing combat, Merivec fought like a demon and tore out the king's throat with his bare hands. Merivec raised his goblet and filled it with the blood of the king, which he then drank from. The other dukes hastily left Mousillon to gather their armies, pursued by twisted creatures and malformed peasants. In the following months, Merivec was publicly denounced by the Fey Enchantress and the newly crowned king. Lyonesse held a massive invasion of Mousillon, and many of the knights of Mousillon gladly took up arms against their liege lord. Having no wish to be associated with their corrupted duke, they swore fealty to Lyonesse. Faced with the might of all of Bretonnia, Merivec was finally slain, though many brave warriors fell beneath his blade. The righteous anger of the Bretonnians against one they see as having tainted their own honour is truly to be feared. Throughout the ages, other crusades have been waged by the proud Bretonnians, yet none of them so great as the next one. One such crusade, however, was laid into the deep deserts east of Araby, in the land of the Tomb Kings, and a great many battles were won in that year. Others saw the Bretonnians fighting far from home, even as far as across the oceans in the jungle lands of the New World. Some of these crusades were declared as errantry wars, a tradition that derives from the old custom of the errands of knighthood. Usually a young knight would be set to a task by their lord, an errand that must be fulfilled before they can attain full knighthood. Errands traditionally included such things as the recovery of a lost artifact, the slaying of a great beast terrorizing a rural village, or successfully escorting a noble lady through dangerous lands. However, in times of war and peril, a king may declare an errantry war. At such times, a young knight-errant may earn the title of Knight of the Realm through brave deeds and daring exploits on the field of battle. When an errantry war is declared, many of the young knights from all over Bretonnia rally to the cause, eager to earn their full knighthood. These unseasoned knights throw themselves into the thick of battle, fighting recklessly and often competitively, trying to outdo their fellow knights in order to show off their skill and gain full knighthood from their superiors. As such, the king may declare an errantry war when he has need to quickly gather a large, well-motivated yet unseasoned army of knights. In the year 1223, King Lewin Orkslayer amassed a grand army after declaring an errantry war, with thousands of young knights joining the ranks of the more experienced retinues of the dukes. Together, this army smashed the growing orc and goblin tribes that had been amassing for many years on the borders of Bretonnia. The traditional frontiers of the dukedoms were expanded, and many greenskin strongholds were conquered. New castles were built along these borders, and many of the young knights-errant were granted these domains along with full knightly titles at the end of the war. The longest errantry war ever fought was launched by King Charlemagne in 1442. The border princes were overrun by enemies, and despite their bitter resistance, they were eventually overrun. Charlemagne responded instantly to their appeal for aid, declaring his intentions to rid the old world of the greenskin menace once and for all. Charlemagne was a brave and mighty warrior, but was never known for his great power of wits and strategy, for everyone knew that the greenskin horde could never truly be defeated. Nevertheless, many thousands of young knights embraced the call for arms, and a great army set off across the mountains, with many knights perishing on the long and arduous journey. At first, victory followed victory, and they pushed the greenskins back, slaughtering them on the banks of the Blood River. However, as the years rolled on by, more young knights travelled to the war zone to gain honour. Bretonnia grew weaker due to the lack of defenders within its border. For over 66 years the war continued, draining Bretonnia of its finances, leaders and entire generations of knights. Eventually, in the year 1444, retaliatory attacks from the Orc tribes ravaged the undefended dukedom of Carcassonne, whilst the knights that should have protected the realm enjoyed the errantry war. Eventually, under King Philippe V, the errantry war was ended after a devastating defeat at Dread Pass, where an entire army of Bretonnian knights was slaughtered by the thousands, as the greenskins pulled these proud knights from their saddles and killed them wholesale. The Bretonnians, in their pride, did not cope well with defeat, and were it not for the wise king ending the wars, then countless more knights may well have thrown their lives away in an effort to regain the honour of their defeated brethren. As the years go by, one of the most recent and major battles fought against an undead horde took place near and within the Lamosenthal Abbey, located around the Grey Mountains. A joint undead and Skaven army led by Lichmaster Heinrich Kemmler and a Wraith Lord named Krell attacked and sacked the aforementioned sacred abbey of the Lady. The battle was a most fierce struggle between the noble knights and the rotting hordes of zombies and warriors Kemmler and Krell had summoned up to serve them. As the battle raged on, knights and undead warriors fought viciously within the sacred grounds. They were finally overcome by the heroic actions of the great Duke Tancred and his powerful companion knights, whom pushed the forces back with a devastating charge and disrupted the sorcerer's hold that held the army together. Seeing the imminent defeat, the Skaven army abandoned their allies, as it is their habit to do. The knights returned victorious, and with much honour, their victory was indeed glorious. However, it was a hollow victory, for the treasonous Skaven had merely used the foolish necromancer to gain hold of a mystical and powerful artifact deep within the abbey. It is believed by most that Heinrich died in that bloody battlefield. Nevertheless, the Lichmaster's body was never found, and Tancred spent the remainder of his life pursuing the hated necromancer onto the ends of the world. Tancred finally fell in battle against the surviving forces of the Lichmaster's minions at the Battle of Montfort Bridge. Just as the hordes of Heinrich were scattered, he fell before he could reach and kill a hooded figure that he believed to be Heinrich the Re-Risen. It is said that the Lich Master is still biding his time to enact his revenge against the Bretonnians that defeated him.